Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today, A Strategic Analysis, PeopleSoft 9.2 versus Oracle Cloud. Happy to have you on the phone today as we go through our presentation. A couple of housekeeping items just to start. My name is Sarah Bougie. I'm the Business Development Manager with Elire, and we'll be helping to present today. Your phones will be on mute throughout the entire presentation, but we will be accepting questions through the portal on the right-hand side of your screen. So feel free to chat us and send us questions anytime throughout the presentation. We'll be making sure that to leave time at the end of the presentation to go through questions and answers for you. And if we happen to not get to all of them, we will make sure we reach out to you and make sure you get the answers as well. We'll be recording the actual presentation today as well, so we'll make sure that all of you receive a copy of the presentation with a full recording so you can share it with your teams or follow up with us with any questions too. And throughout the presentation today, we'll have several poll questions that we encourage you to participate with. This just gives us a good idea of who's in our audience today, who's listening in, and then how we can best follow up with you afterwards as well. We want to make sure we have a good idea of who's on the phone with us today. So we'll actually start with our first poll question here. Just to get a good idea of who's on the phone, what ERP or HCM solution does your organization currently use? PeopleSoft version 9.2, PeopleSoft version 9.1 or previous, Oracle Cloud or in process of implementing Oracle Cloud, or a combination of PeopleSoft and Cloud, or a different solution altogether? All right, we'll show the results here. It looks like the majority of you are on PeopleSoft version 9.2, but we have a good spread here for everyone to go through. So good conversation starters for us today. So with that, we'll introduce a little bit about Elire. If you're new to our organization, we're established in 2005, so celebrating 12 years of business this year. We're a full service consulting firm that partners with Oracle. So we help our clients succeed by working with you to efficiently implement, integrate, upgrade, modify your software investments through Oracle to make sure that you're getting that best possible ROI out of your investments. So happy to help with any questions that you guys have. Most of our consultants average 15 to 20 years experience in the field. So have definitely worked with lots of clients across all industries and experiences, so happy to work with you with anything that you guys are going on. And with that, I'll hand it over to Richard Merrill, who'll be our presenter today, who's going to start off with introducing himself and get going for you.
Thank you, and welcome everybody. So as mentioned, I'll be presenting today, talking to you about this topic about whether you are considering an upgrade to 9.2 or considered an implementation of Oracle Cloud, or maybe considering a combination of the two. And just a little bit about myself. I'm an associate partner with Elire. I lead our strategic advisory services practice, which I'll tell you a little bit more about in a moment. I have over 20 years experience in both consulting and industry. And during that time, I've spent a significant amount of that time developing strategic roadmaps, leading large-scale business transformation, and managing programs and projects. Now, the strategic advisory services practice, just a little bit more about that. So we have several different areas in which we deliver services, and one of those areas is strategy, which we'll be focusing on today, talking to you about how we help our clients develop roadmaps. Another area we spend a significant amount of work is around business process improvement, helping clients do end-to-end process redesigns, or maybe more targeted process improvements, like within a specific project. We just helped a client improve their AP process through some AP automation, for instance. And then we also provide some process tools training if people are interested in learning how to do some of this on their own. A third area we're focusing more and more on is outsourcing and vendor management, and helping our clients look at everything from requirements and vendor selection through contracting and governance. And then finally, more and more of our engagements, we're playing a role that involves end user adoption and change enablement. whether that's working on cloud implementations or working on 9.2 upgrades. We just wrapped up 2 of these projects in which we were acting as the primary change management resources. And so a whole wide range of services delivered by my practice. My practice is just one of several practices within the larger Elire family. But today we'll focus on strategic roadmap. And as part of this introduction, we'll be talking to you really about our methodology. Now, I know most of you are on 9.2, but a good chunk of you are on 9.1 or previous, and are probably considering whether you upgrade or go to cloud. And some of you are actually in the process of implementing cloud or some combination of the both. So today, what we want to talk to you about is our 5-step approach to developing a strategic roadmap in terms of making that decision of, do I upgrade or do I implement Oracle Cloud? And of course, if you've already upgraded and you're considering implementing cloud for some aspect of your business, perhaps you're on 9.2 for upgrade. I'm sorry, you've upgraded to 9.2 for financials, or maybe you're looking at Oracle Cloud for some other aspect. This methodology can help you as well. And the methodology is built around a lot of interaction with key stakeholders so that you get support from the very beginning. And today we'll really be talking about the methodology itself with some real-world examples. And in terms of introductions, we'll be going through each of these 5 steps in depth, talking about how you get a project off the ground, how you align stakeholders from the very beginning, talk about how you understand your current state through what we call a disconnect assessment. You'll be hearing a lot about disconnects today. Disconnects are basically pain points. And obviously, if you're going through the time and expense of upgrading or implementing a new system, you want to make sure it actually solves your problems. And we'll also talk to you about how to conduct some listening tours to listen both internally and externally. The 4th step is review and validation. And then finally, we'll talk to you about the 5th step, which is analysis and solutions. How do you put all of this information together so you can make a thoughtful decision and achieve your desired future state? So as I mentioned, we'll dive into each of these 5 over the next hour. And before we get into that, and before we begin on mobilization, I will throw it back to Sarah, who will be asking you about a second poll question.
All right, so our second poll question today is, does your organization currently have an IT roadmap in place for the next 3 to 5 years? Yes, no, or unsure? And it looks like the large majority of you do have a plan in place for the next 3 to 5 years, so that's great.
And so let's work our way across this whiteboard, so to speak, and go through each of those major steps. And the first step we want to focus on is mobilize. How do you mobilize one of these roadmap efforts? And do so that you actually build buy-in from the very beginning. And the first thing we recommend, of course, is just confirming what is your scope. And so that basically involves identifying the in-scope process, the in-scope modules, and understanding what's in scope as well as what. When we do this, we also like to understand what is the level of detail we're going to have to get into when we look at current state. After we mobilize, we spend a lot of time in what we call disconnect analysis, looking at the current state. And as part of that, we do a lot of process mapping. And so when we do those mapping, are we going to do a deep dive cross-functional process map, known as a swim lane map? I think that's familiar to probably most of you. Or there may be some processes where a higher level of detail is needed. And we could do that through something called a SIPOC. And a SIPOC, for those of you who are not familiar, here's just an image of one. And a SIPOC basically stands for suppliers, inputs, process, outputs, and customers. So rather than doing a deep dive swim lane map, you could create one of these maps that identifies the inputs to your process, like AP, AR, GL, cash management, whatever the case might be. What are the inputs into your AP process and who supplies them? And then how are those inputs transformed into an output? And then who receives those outputs in the form of a customer? And so this map, as you can see, describes the process in around 7 boxes, and it's just not as detailed. And we like to use this as an accelerator tool for processes that are maybe not as crucial or don't have as many issues and pain points. And it allows us to gather an enormous amount of data without spending the time on developing a cross-functional map. So when we confirm scope, we also talk about what's the level of detail we're going to be diving into. In addition to confirming scope and identifying which processes are in and which processes are out, we also want to know what are the roles people play within those processes. And we do this to determine who really should be involved in the current state mapping sessions, because we realize these sessions do take time away from people's day jobs, and we want to make sure we have a very targeted audience of the right people in the room. And we use this tool called a RACI, which stands for who is responsible, accountable, consulted, or informed. And for those who are not familiar, responsible are people who actually do the work. They're the hands, the keyboard people. Continuing upon that AP example, maybe they're the people who get the invoices into the system and get them coded. And then there's an accountable person, like maybe an AP manager, who is the one person who makes sure all of that work is getting done. When we're looking at an in-scope process and trying to map it out, we want to make sure we have the responsible and accountable people in the room, because those are the people who understand how the work is done today, and they understand all of the disconnects or pain points that we're going to need to resolve. We also, though, want to think about, do we need people who are consulted in a process? Those are people who might be upstream or downstream. In AP, it might be folks in procurement. It could be folks on the back end in terms of payments and treasury. There are people not directly involved, but they care very much about the inputs and the outputs of the process. And we invite those people as optional and make sure that they get copies of the maps and have a chance to provide input. Because if we're going to deploy an upgrade or a new technology for AP, we want to make sure it not only works for the AP department, but for the folks upstream and downstream. And then there are people who are informed. And these are the folks who you do not have to invite into the session. And oftentimes, these folks end up in the room, and it's a little bit of a too many cooks spoil the recipe type situation. And what you realize is these people really don't have to be in the room. We don't have to take time away from those schedules, but we can just share a copy of information with them. So RACI is a great tool in terms of helping us understand who are key stakeholders and who really needs to be in the room so that we can very quickly and efficiently move through the process of mapping out current state. And we just have a quick accelerator tool built within Excel that we input all of the people, we input all the processes, and then we start picking who's consulted, who's responsible. And we can use that to then help generate meeting invites and the like, and get those out there on people's calendars. So RACI is a very helpful tool that lets us really identify our stakeholders. And once we know all of these stakeholders, that's when we really like to do a kickoff or a methodology orientation. We believe it's so important. We're going to talk to you today about these 5 steps. Well, the people who are involved in the process need to understand those 5 steps as well. They need to understand the approach, the timeline, the time commitments. We find that people come to working sessions, and again, those working sessions are the sessions in which we're doing current state process mapping, but people come to those sessions much more prepared when they know the approach, the timeline, etc. And we also find that the more people know the methodology, they understand each of the 5 phases, the more they buy into the overall end state recommendations. So as part of our mobilization step, after we focus on scope and RACI, we definitely do a methodology orientation. And then the final step within mobilization is getting to some alignment around decision parameters. What criteria are important to help select upgrade to 9.2 or migrate to cloud. And we have just a sample list here that we've used at other clients. And we often like to try to tie these to company goals or division goals. What we do stress is that in mobilization, we're trying to get alignment and get as good a draft list as possible. Throughout the course of the roadmap project, we could always add parameters or subtract them, but we try to identify as many as we can early on so that we can really begin data collection from the get-go. And we'll talk in the next phase about how some of that data collection begins. But just some of these parameters we've used in the past include usability. Usability can be a key decision maker, particularly if your user community is envisioning a more mobile experience. We'll be talking to you a lot today about disconnects. Again, disconnects are pain points, but you want to buy a system that is right for you and resolves your problems. You don't necessarily want to implement the system that works for another company. You want to implement the system that works for you. And of course, cost is often a consideration, both implementation cost and ongoing costs. And Oracle has done a lot in terms of updating their costing models. Some of you may have seen some of those announcements in the last week or so. But then interfaces and integrations can be a key consideration. The ease of interfaces, the ability of the system to meet your security risk guidelines. Will data conversion be required? If so, what's the amount and difficulty of it? And then depending on your organization, if you're going from 9.2 to cloud or what have you, the amount of change you're absorbing and the training required can be very important decision criteria. And then of course, all of these help boil down to different requirements and how well is the system meeting your requirements. So during mobilization, we'll take you through a very thoughtful exercise regarding what criteria are important to you and again, trying to tie those to your own goals as much as possible. So that sort of wraps up the summary of the methodology for mobilization. And before we get on to the next phase, we'll pause there again for another poll question.
Thanks, Richard. Our third poll question today is, does your organization currently have a business process review strategic direction guide in place? Yes, no, no, but interested in creating one, and unsure. All right, looks like 53% of you actually are unsure on that.
Okay. And so obviously then we hope that this is very helpful for you today, and we'll try to answer as many of your questions as possible. And we'll have some information about how to contact us at the end of this if you have some additional follow-up questions. We want to help you through that uncertainty as much as we possibly can. So let's talk about the next phase. We've now mobilized the project. The next phase is called disconnect assessment. And during this phase, it's all about understanding your real problem so you can apply the solution that is right to you. And the first step in this approach is looking at process mapping. Now, as I mentioned, we do identify a set of in-scope processes. We identify the detail we're going to need. And we also look at, identifying the RACI so we can get sessions scheduled. And the approach we use is a highly interactive approach, not dissimilar from that little picture you see there where we literally throw paper up on the wall. using Post-it notes to map out with Elire experts as well as your key stakeholders, what does the process look like from either a cross-functional perspective, cross-functional process map, or the higher level SciPoc. And when we do our mapping exercises, we apply 3 different tools that we think help set our process mapping apart from many of our competitors, and ultimately gives you a richer set of data describing the current state and gives you more information to make a better, more thoughtful, more informed decision. And those tools are process attributes, shape data, and disconnects, and I'll dive into those each really quickly. So in terms of process attributes, when we're mapping out a process, we like to identify what are the key audit points and what process step do they occur? Are there key reports? Are there any key policies and procedures, whether documented or undocumented? And what are there customizations or configurations? And are there any interfaces? So we believe describing the process and adding these attributes onto the map really provides a greater amount of detail, and that information could feed into a potential source of disconnects, or with interfaces, as you see later, it could feed into some additional information to help make you a more informed decision. So we have a little snapshot here of a process map with a little bit of a zoom in. It's a little blurry, but you can see we actually put those icons right within the process boxes themselves. So, and your auditors and other folks who really love this, because they can actually see where are the audit points, or where are key reports, where are key configurations, etc., as an icon within the process map itself. Now, when we add that extra data, we're capturing a lot of information about the process steps and a lot of information about those process attributes. And some companies will just give you a drawing of your process and then reams and reams of Excel information. But what we like to do is use something called shape data, which is a free and delivered tool within Microsoft Visio. And it really allows you to capture an enormous amount of data about your processes and associate that data with your process map in the similar to a little mini database. So if you use Visio just to draw boxes and connect them with arrows, you're really just creating a picture. And that picture could be created in PowerPoint, it could be created in Word, but what shape data lets you do is not only draw the picture, but add data to those shapes of the picture. And when you're adding data and creating that little database, you're actually defining data fields, and you're populating those data fields with values. Now, a data field is really just a labeled cell that can hold values, just like a typical database. The data field could be racy. It could identify a key metric. It could identify any other information regarding that process you would like. And then the value, of course, is associated with that. If it's a metric, what's the value of the metric? If it's racy, then who is responsible? Who is accountable? So all of that information can be populated within the shape data, and you can use that to run reports. And so zooming in here, on a typical process map, you don't have a lot of space to describe what's happening. In this example, box 13, manually reconcile. It tells you a little bit, but not too much. You can see part of the shape data up at the top of the screen, where you can add a richer description. We have about 2 sentences there, adding extra information about what's going on. We can also add shape data for each of those process attributes. So remember, the process attributes are those little icons. We have an audit icon, which is a magnifying glass, and we have a customization icon, which is the wrench and screwdriver. And that gives you space to add extra information about those as well. And you can have really as many of these shape data fields as you'd like, with holding as much information as you'd like. So shape data, in addition to process attributes, are 2 ways we think we build process maps that are much richer in terms of their information. The other thing we do is identify disconnects, and you keep hearing me use that term. A disconnect is really anything that impedes the efficiency or effectiveness of the process. Efficiency simply means that the process consumes too many resources. Going back to that AP example, it just takes too much time, too many people, too many resources to get those invoices processed and paid. Your turnaround time is just, it's too long. Effectiveness is that, it's really anything that causes the process to not generate the desired result. Maybe the invoice in the AP process gets input, but it gets coded incorrectly, and then someone has to fix it down the line. Or the payment goes out to the wrong vendor, which could potentially happen if you have one vendor who has multiple vendor addresses. You want to make sure you're getting it to that right address. So disconnects are identified in those process mapping workshops, and we identify them across 9 different buckets. Because a lot of people think this is a technology project, we're here to solve just the technology problems. But what we feel is that your upgrade or implementation will be a lot more successful if you understand and resolve the non-system related disconnects as well. For instance, you may have disconnects that derive from a strategy. Maybe you've always had the strategy that customization is okay, or you may have undocumented or unclear policies, or you may have policies that get in your way. I've seen time and expense policies where every expense over $1 requires a paper receipt, and that receipt has to be collected, it has to be scanned, it has to be attached, it has to be reviewed, it has to be approved. That policy of $1 or more receipts creates a lot of extra work. Is that the right policy? There may be too many handoffs within an organization. There could also be disconnects that involve the information flow or the system. Obviously, well, we always focus on those. Or they could involve the design of the process or the data that comes into the process. And finally, you may have some lower level disconnects around unclear roles and responsibilities, or people who don't have the right skills or right job environment. So, when dealing with an upgrade and when dealing with an implementation of cloud, you certainly want to identify the system that resolves your information flow and process flow disconnects. But you want to make sure that you also address issues around roles and responsibilities, issues around policy, because that could make the implementation of the upgrade or the new system much more successful. So identifying disconnects in all of these buckets makes for a more holistic result. And during this phase, we spend a lot of time analyzing those disconnects. We always really recommend that elimination of disconnects is a decision parameter that clients should use. And we've spent a lot of time upgrading over the years, a lot of time migrating folks to cloud. And so we will perform a type of fit gap to let you know which disconnects, are resolved by the different solutions, so that you understand what is the right solution for you, using a lot of our experience, again, with both systems. And then, of course, when we analyze those disconnects, again, particularly people from my team will be focusing on, do you have issues with policies and processes and roles and responsibilities? If you're going into an upgrade, if you're going into an implementation of cloud, you're mobilizing a lot of resources. Why not take advantage of that huge effort to also resolve all of those other disconnects as well? So during this phase, not only are we mapping your current state and identifying your process attributes, identifying your disconnects, but we're also obviously doing a lot of analysis of disconnects. And we're starting to gather a lot of data on those decision-making criteria that we chose during the mobilization phase. Now, if resolution of disconnects was a criteria, and we usually recommend that it is, we just talked about how we start to gather that data. But during this phase, we'd also be looking at gathering cost information. What is the licenses, number of licenses, how many seats, etc. We may be doing some research around data conversion. And so a lot of that data could start to be collected during this phase. in the next phase, which is called listening tours, that may be where we start to gather data on usability, interfaces, security. I'll talk to you more about those. But certainly during this phase, you can begin collecting a lot of your key decision-making criteria. And before we get into that next phase around listening tours, just want to reopen it up for poll question number 4.
So our fourth poll question today is, what are some obstacles your organization faces to decide what solution is best for you? Uncertainty of the future of PeopleSoft, unknowns related to Oracle Cloud and its capabilities, lack of motivation internally to adjust to new changes, lack of internal leadership support and buy-in, or budget restraints. And you can select more than one on this question as well. So it looks like it's a good combination between budget restraints and unknowns related to Oracle Cloud and its capabilities.
Okay. And, as part of this methodology, one of the things we can also do, depending upon your organization's level of comfort, and it sounds like a lot of you don't necessarily have a lot of comfort with cloud, is, prepare demos of certainly the Oracle Cloud suite of products, so that your team can better participate in sessions throughout the roadmap process. And also those who are facing a budget obstacle, there is a lot of new pricing guidelines out just this last week announced by Larry Ellison, talking about the new pricing models that they're implementing for Oracle Cloud. And so a lot of that information can be shared with you by Sarah and other folks on our team. And for those, excuse me, who, just have some uncertainty around the future of PeopleSoft, and I guess around 38% of you do, the new model is once you upgrade to 9.2, then images are released several times throughout the year, maybe 6 to 7 times a year, and it's up to you to sort of bring down those images and selectively adopt new functionality. And we see a lot of potential there in terms of giving access to your client base, giving access to new tools, new functionality on a much faster timeline than you've had in the past. In the past, you might have had to wait 3 or 4 years to upgrade. Once you get to 9.2, you can then start bringing down new functionality on a regular schedule. And that functionality could be new, it could resolve existing disconnects. So getting to 9.2 or looking at cloud and its capabilities is something we can certainly talk to you about and help you better understand what the future of 9.2 looks like, what the roadmap looks like. And then, again, there's been a lot of interesting announcements these last couple of weeks around costing and what have you. So we've gone through mobilization and we've gone through a lot of assessment of information. So let's dive into that third step, which is looking at some listening tours. And here we'll talk about some internal and external listening tours. And for certainly the internal listening tours, it's an opportunity to continue that change management conversation. So listening tours, as I mentioned, could be internal or external. And from an internal point of view, you might do some interviews with the people we identified on the RACI. So that RACI that we did during mobilization gets used over and over again. And we may sit down with some of those key stakeholders and talk to them about specific decision criteria. For instance, if usability was important to you, we really want to sit down with different users and find out how they want to interact with the system, particularly if they have mobile requirements. Also, if security and risk was a concern and a key criteria for you, then we want to maybe interview the security risk group at your organization and talk to them about their data requirements and any areas of concern they have regarding compliance. And this step I talked about listening towards can build or continue the change management conversation. So obviously some security groups, some risk compliance groups have a lot of nervousness about migrating to cloud. Having these early on conversations with them and understanding how the data is stored, how it moves back and forth, can go a long way in alleviating those concerns and helping them become more comfortable with the change. But you also may be doing some internal surveys. So interviews are sort of that one-on-one conversation. A survey, of course, goes to a much broader audience. Well, you may survey several hundred, several thousand users, for instance, to find out what the users don't like about the system, understanding things that bug them today, so to speak. The things that bug them today could become requirements of the new system. And so doing some internal surveys is a great way to engage the user base and start to get them moving along that change management continuum as well. Now, when we talk about listening tours, we talk a lot about internal interviews and surveys, but there may be a need to do some external interviews, particularly around interfaces. So, as I mentioned earlier, when we map out the current state, we identify different process attributes. And one of those attributes could be interfaces and different points of integration. Now, for those interfaces, depending on the interfaces we identify on the map and in the shape data, we have a lot of information already about how 9.2 or the Oracle Cloud, how those interfaces are built, how compatible they are, etc. But there may be a need to do some external listening tours with key vendors to understand your particular interface needs, particularly if there's been some customization or what have you over the years. And so during this phase, this third phase of listening tours, it's really about talking to select key stakeholders, both internal and external, to continue to gather information about those key decision criteria. And again, if interfaces, security, usability are key criteria, then this phase becomes a very helpful and important phase where you can gather additional information. Now, after that phase and after the assess phase, we really spent a couple of weeks gathering a lot of information from a lot of different stakeholders. And what we want to do next is the fourth phase, which is a pretty short phase, but a very important phase, which is just around reviewing and validating the information that's been collected. So again, this can be a very quick step, but it's an important step to make sure all of those stakeholders, you continue to have them aligned, you continue to have them engaged, and they continue to feel that they were heard. So this is really where you want to finalize all that material you collected through the disconnect analysis, your various process maps, your side POCs, etc., and all those interviews and survey materials. And as I mentioned, it really does help to continue to build internal support so that people have a sense of ownership of these materials and can really confirm and acknowledge disconnects and other findings. And review and validation can be done with interactive work sessions similar to process mapping, or it can be done via conference call. But again, this step is helpful to make sure that people are that you continue to have alignment and support throughout the various phases. Now, the final phase we'll talk about is getting into the analysis and solution and really choosing your path forward. And in this phase, we obviously will spend a lot of time analyzing those parameters. So up until now, we've been discussing parameters, deciding them, collecting data. Here, we really want to do deep dive analyses, leveraging all of our Elire experience with both solutions. If disconnects were important, then what's sort of the fit gap? What solution, upgrading or migrating to cloud, does a better job resolving those disconnects? If interfaces are important, which system is going to be more compatible, have easier interfaces that take less time to build and less time to support? what's the cost of the different solutions, both ongoing cost as well as the upfront cost. And then we also like to prepare overall summaries across all of those criteria, so you can have a one-page sort of decision-making matrix, so to speak, where you can see all of your different categories and all of the different options and see it scored, and use that information to make a very thoughtful decision about what is your desired future state. And of course, that decision will have a lot of buy-in from your stakeholders because they would have participated. They are the ones who identified the disconnects. They are the ones who put the interfaces on the maps. They're the ones providing information about number of seats, et cetera, et cetera. So they're seeing all of this information, and you're really building internal support with your leaders and with your stakeholders, so that when you come out of this step, you really excuse me, will have alignment regarding, do I upgrade or do I migrate to cloud? Now, making that decision is a huge accomplishment and a very important deliverable of this entire 5-step methodology. But we don't like to just help clients make the decision. We also like to help them move beyond that decision and start to get to implementing the upgrade or implementing the new system. And so in addition to working through these 5 steps to analyze parameters and make that decision, we also like to work with you around what is your approach to implementing that selected solution? What is the scope? What is the timeline? What is the cost estimate? That timeline could be a phased approach if necessary. And what we'll find, or what you will find, is that if you choose upgrade, obviously upgrade, well, if you choose upgrade or migrating to cloud, both of those have design components. You have to design a system, you have to develop a system, you have to test a system, you have to roll out the system. What you'll find is that by going through this roadmap, you have a lot of critical information that feeds directly into your design phase and lets your design phase be a little more accelerated, so that you don't have to repeat any of this work. All of this work helps you launch and move through design much quicker. And so the money and time spent here really pays benefits down the road as you're looking at actually implementing a solution. And then, of course, these decisions often require business cases, and the business case is really built around the resolution of those disconnects and the ability of the solution to meet those different selected criteria. And that really serves as the basis of the business case, and we'll help work with you to qualitatively and quantitatively put that together, and that you'll have good buy-in and support of that business case throughout. And coming out of this, deliverables can include, not only that scope and timeline and cost estimate in the business case, but also, what's your architectural diagram? What's it look current state versus a midterm state versus a long-term state, so that you can really understand how your architecture is evolving over the next several years as you implement these solutions. And we're also able to tie in other initiatives you might have. If you're looking at other targeted solutions, such as things like Taleo, how does that plug and play into these different systems, and how does the implementation of those systems look as well? So all of that can be pulled together into a unified roadmap and supporting business case. And so I'll pause there for our 5th and final poll question, and I'll turn it back to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Richard. Our last poll question today is, have you participated in or seen a demonstration of Oracle Cloud? Yes, no, would like to see one, no, would not care for one, or unsure. And it looks like about 53% of you have seen a demonstration. And the rest of
which is great. And that is curious, though, because I do know that on that previous question, a lot of you did express some concerns about understanding the functionality within cloud. So perhaps you've had a demo, but that demo didn't answer all of your needs, or it didn't specifically address the way you need to use the system. So we can certainly work with you even if you've had a demo, but you have questions out there, then if some of that 53% of you who've had the demo are also the people who were unsure of some cloud functionality, we can maybe help close some of those gaps. And then for that third of you who'd like to see a demo, Sarah can certainly help work with you on that. And because I know, going back to that first poll question, some of you, a good chunk of you are still on 9.1 and are maybe facing this decision of upgrading or moving to cloud, or maybe looking at some combination of the two. So we definitely want to help close any information gaps that you have. So really, just in summary then, we want to wrap up here and pause to take some questions. We've been asking you questions. We want to give you a chance to ask us some questions. But again, what we've done here is very quickly sort of move through each of those 5 steps and talk to you about how you can build support through each of those steps, talk to you about different tools that we use, different accelerators that we have to try to move through those steps as quickly as possible, and talk to you about how the work you do here can really be leveraged again in the design phases of whatever solution you choose. Now, obviously, a common question is, how long and how many resources do these types of roadmap projects take? And from a consulting point of view, we could really do this with as few as 2 people, someone from my business process consultant team, as well as a functional consultant. Now, if there are a lot of modules in scope, a lot of processes in scope, if we're looking at financials and HR, then that's going to require more people. But if we're looking at a very targeted analysis of GL, AP, AR, maybe a very basic usage, then that could be done with a very small team. And it could be done within as few as 6 to 8 weeks, which is, again, that timeline would expand out depending upon the complexity and number of processes involved, and also the number of decision criteria. If you have 3 or 4 key criteria, that doesn't take as much time to work through as if you have 8 or 9 or 10 key criteria. So as we're talking to you about potentially looking at a roadmap, we'll start to get a better idea of, are you talking financials? Are you talking HR? What modules are you talking about? Do you have a sense of the criteria you're talking about? And that'll help us create a better estimate. But in general, you can get through this fairly quickly, in about 1.5 months, 2 months, and with a very small number of resources. And again, the time and energy spent here can be leveraged in the design phases of your projects and help speed those along as well. So we'll open it up for questions, and we'll just leave this displayed so that you have my contact information and Sarah's contact information in case, for whatever reason, you'd rather email your question. But Sarah, I'll throw it back to you if you want to moderate some questions.
So the first question I have is, are there any possible risks associated of staying on PeopleSoft 9.2 for the next few years?
And that's a great question, and a question a lot of people ask us about. And there are not a lot of significant risks. There are not really any risks, to be honest. As I mentioned, the new approach is once you're upgraded to 9.2, then Oracle will release functionality throughout the year in new images. Maybe they'll release 6 to 7 a year. And as those images are released, you would be able to review that functionality and selectively adopt what functionality works for you. And then you would simply go through a process of pulling down the code, testing it, maybe doing some training, what have you, and then rolling it out to your user base. So if you decide to stay on 9.2, you can look forward to continuing to get new functionality from Oracle over the next several years to help resolve existing disconnects or to maybe roll out new functionality. So not a lot of risks in terms of staying on 9.2.
Thanks, Richard. And we kind of had a similar question come in as a follow-up to that about what's the value of staying on a legacy on-prem licensing model when there has been a huge shift in the marketplace to go to cloud. What's the value of staying on-prem?
Well, and that's actually a really great question, and we're actually putting together a presentation that we might want to share with you. We'll be doing that presentation, we think, at Collaborate, if you happen to go to Collaborate, and we can, maybe whoever asked that particular question, we can work to get you that information. But we'll be doing a presentation on what's the value of staying on-prem versus going to PeopleSoft Cloud versus going to Oracle Cloud. And so we can have some very targeted information that we can share with you on that.
Perfect. And the second question, Richard, is what are some of the common roadblocks Elire encounters while working with organizations on this specific decision?
I think common roadblocks that I see, one of them is organizations are sort of just wanting to leap into a decision without really understanding what's the right solution for them. Cloud gets a lot of press. It's a great solution, but you should be migrating to cloud because it's the right solution for you, not because you read about it every day in the newspaper or on the web. And so a roadblock that we see is just a lack of knowledge about what the different solutions can deliver to you. And one of the reasons we spend so much time in this roadmap methodology, understanding current state and understanding your specific problems, is so that we can really apply the right problem for you. So a lack of knowledge about your true problems and what is the right solution for you is a very common roadblock. I think two other common roadblocks, which are not unique to this decision, are achieving alignment with buy-in, as well as getting through, budget approvals. And so again, a lot of this methodology is spent around engaging stakeholders early and often so that we carry them along and they buy into the decision, and then delivering a robust business case. So those are three sort of common roadblocks that we've seen over the years, and it's one of the reasons we've tweaked the methodology to make sure we address those.
Perfect. And our next question is, what's the value add to dedicating the time and funding to building a comprehensive roadmap like this?
And that's another good question. So I think the value add gets back to some of my closing comments there, which is we all know if you decide to upgrade to 9.2 that there's an enormous design effort involved. And if you migrate to cloud, there's also a design effort involved. That design effort often involves understanding your current state and mapping it out. It often involves having to do listening tours and understanding requirements and identifying your interfaces. The value add for this roadmap is you not only have more confidence that you made the right decision for you, but that all of that information you collected can really shorten your design phase for the other solutions. So the money you spend here is really leveraged in those other projects and can reduce the cost and time frame of those other projects. I think another value add is migrating to cloud can be a significant change, especially if you've been a PeopleSoft shop for a long time. There's a lot of audit concerns, security concerns, compliance issues, and as we mentioned, this methodology really addresses a lot of those by identifying key audit points and interfaces and speaking to the right people up front so that you carry them along with that change. And they're more comfortable with the idea of migrating to cloud. So that's another significant value add, is breaking through some of those barriers of fear, so to speak, about moving to cloud. Particularly for some of you who work in industries with data that's very, very sensitive, given all of the news articles we see about hacks and everything else, it's a significant concern. And doing some of this upfront analysis can really help allay those concerns and make sure you're making the right decision for you.
Thanks, Richard. And it looks like we've come to the last of our questions here, so we're going to go ahead and end it there for today. Like I said at the beginning, we will be sending out the full recording to all of you who are registrants here, and please feel free, our email addresses are up there, but we'll also send out our contact information as well. Feel free to follow up with us with any additional questions that you have. Like we said throughout the presentation today, we know what a big decision this is for your organizations, and we know how much work and effort has to go into it, and we're happy to work with Oracle and with you to either give you that demonstration of the cloud that you've been looking for, or talk through the different specifics between both options for you as you move through the next solution phase. So happy to help you in any way we can. Thanks so much, Richard, for your time today, and for everyone who joined the call, and hopefully we'll be talking with all of you soon. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thanks all.